From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Cheung, and this matters.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
That's from the 80s classic Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And if that movie was made in 2020, he wouldn't have to jump through hoops to find a way to get out of class, because in Ontario, school's out. Earlier this week, the Ontario government made the final call. All in-person classes from kindergarten to grade 12 will be cancelled through to the end of June. Students will keep learning online like they have for the past couple of months, but the cancellation affects 2 million students. Here's Premier Doug Ford on why they made this decision.
After consulting with the health experts, it is clear that we cannot open schools at this time. I'm just not going to risk it.
Education Minister Stephen Lecce says they're working on a wide-ranging plan to reopen schools in time for September. That plan will drop sometime in June.
It is obvious that schools will not look the same, that we have to reimagine education in some respects in September, given that there will have to be some protocol changes, distancing.
But still, there's the reality of how frustrating this all is. Students miss their friends while graduating classes have more anxiety than usual. Some teachers say online learning is no substitution for the real thing, and parents are burned out, pulling double duty while working from home. So what now? What does the reopening of schools look like in the fall? And how will Ontario's education system change in the long term? Today, we're talking to Toronto Star's Queen's Park reporter, Kristin Rushowy. Chris knows the education beat well, having covered it for 15 years, and she still specializes on reporting all things education at the provincial level. Chris, thanks so much for making time for us.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here.
So, students have been out of classrooms since mid-March. I think for everybody, students, teachers, parents, it's been a weird and I'm sure really frustrating kind of limbo. But what led up to the Ontario government deciding that schools will stay closed for the rest of the year?
Well, I think there were a number of factors. I mean, first of all, that, everything's been shut down to the end of May anyway. So what was the reason for going back for a few weeks? I mean, you even saw the premier yesterday saying, why would we chance it for a few weeks? It's just not worth it. Most of the other provinces have also said no classes this year. I mean, there have been some exceptions in Quebec and BC, but for the most part, most jurisdictions are not going back. The other thing, you can look to France, for example. They just started allowing students back and already have had a surge in cases that are school related. So I think there were sort of all these different factors that played into it.
Was the province also thinking that really there's no safe way to reopen right now? They just don't have the structure in place to do that?
Well, I think there's a lot of things, right? I mean, it would be for a few weeks. The schools still need a really deep cleaning. They'd have to mobilize teachers to go back to school, actually physically into the buildings, whereas teachers have been now teaching from home, right? With the online learning, they've adjusted to that. So I think it would have just been a lot of upset in a very short period of time with really not any measurable results.
The scope of this cancellation is obviously pretty far-reaching, and this is a big question, but what does losing the rest of the year mean potentially to Ontario's education system, you think?
Well, the kids will have been out of school for a very long time, right? Because they left for March break, which was mid-March, and then have not been back. So, I mean, that's 3+ months of schooling. And there's no way that the online learning can keep up with that for 3.5 months of curriculum. There's no way. The issue will be when they go back in the fall. And I know a lot of jurisdictions have been talking about this, is just how they're going to identify the gaps and then figure out how to fill the gaps. Because it will depend. Some kids have been doing their work. I mean, I have 3 kids, 2 are doing their work, 1 is not. I mean, 1 is quite far behind, the other 2 are not. So, you put that to a whole class and the teachers are going to have a bunch of different students at a bunch of different levels that they're going to have to deal with. The other thing that schools are going to have to deal with, and certainly in the States, they've been talking a lot about this, is kids' mental health. They've not been with their friends. They've not seen their teachers. They've lost all these connections. Their home life might not be great. Some go to school. Yeah. Kids in Toronto go to school, right? It's sort of their refuge. So they're going to have to deal with that as well. And I know in the States, there's a task force of about 16 states, most of them in the South, and they've been looking at ways to address the mental health first, and then they're going to fill in the academic gaps.
Wow. Okay. So they're thinking about it not just obviously in terms of the academic, but how this is affecting students on a much bigger scale.
Yeah, their mental health and well-being, right? And also kids have been cooped up, right? They've been inside and not able to see their friends. I mean, I guess with the nicer weather now they'll be getting out, but that's pretty hard emotionally on them. I think for a lot of students, they're missing out on milestones as well. So you look at grade 8 or maybe even grade 6 students, if they go to a middle school, they're missing out on grad. They're missing out on that transition from grade 8 to grade 9, from grade 6 to grade 7. Students in grade 12 are missing out on prom and grad and things like that. So there's a lot of these sort of missed milestones that students are mourning as well.
Do you know to what extent the ministry is thinking about how this is affecting students on that larger scale too? You asked Stephen Lecce yesterday, obviously, about special needs students and the big supports that they need there. Of just what a task this is heading into June. Do you know what sort of conversations the ministry has been having on that front?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things. I mean, the government has also talked about mental health of students, live video conferencing, or they call it synchronous learning. So there's some sort of real-time live component to it. The minister has said that he expects teachers to be doing that. Not all of them are. Some of them are, but not all of them. So there's that he wants ramped up. Teachers are still asked to do report cards, final report cards. So there will be some level, some measure of achievement. Students' grades cannot go down from what they were pre-March break.
I mean, you're a parent yourself. What has it been like on the receiving end of this?
It's been tough. The online learning is a tough sell, I think, for the kids. I mean, it depends. My older daughter's in grade 12, so she's highly motivated in things like chemistry and math because she's going to need them when she goes to university. I have twins. They're in grade 10. My daughter has math, so she's kept on top of that. But I find when it's not sort of a class like math that they know they need to keep up with, it's hard to keep them on top of their schoolwork.
What do you think the reaction so far has been from educators to know that, okay, for the foreseeable future here, we're going to have to do e-learning, and even into September, we don't know what that looks like?
So during negotiations with the teachers, e-learning was the big sticking point. So last March, the former education minister announced that students in high school would have to earn 4 mandatory online credits. It caused an uproar among educators, right? Because the class sizes would be bigger. They felt that this was a way to just cut teaching jobs. Students didn't like it. So in the end, with the contracts reached with the teachers, the deal was 2 mandatory courses with a very liberal, easy opt-out policy. So that's sort of the backdrop for this whole e-learning. It's a pretty controversial issue among teachers. The teacher unions aren't keen on the synchronous or the real-time live video conferencing for a number of reasons. One is they see it sort of as the creeping in of e-learning. The other is that they have privacy and security concerns for teachers because there have been cases where, for example, a Zoom or a Google Hangout has been hacked. So they have those concerns. They've advised, I think for the most part, they've all advised their teachers not to do the live synchronous learning. But as I mentioned before, some are. So that's sort of the backdrop with the e-learning. But I mean, during a pandemic, when kids are at home, this is the reality. And I think and even be the reality in the fall. So it'll be interesting to see how school boards roll that out as it comes along, because it is going to be a big issue.
I mean, you were one of the reporters who broke that story about e-learning and the education ministry's plans for it. It's a weird kind of irony that e-learning is exactly what's happening right now because there is no other choice.
There is no other choice, right? That's the whole thing. It's interesting that this was the big issue and now this is the way kids are learning. So, I mean, I think it's interesting. You see a variety of things. I'll even just talk about my own kids' teachers. There's one who I think it was during the March break, even when sort of the shutdown was starting to happen, he was posting daily messages to the kids with an inspirational song for them to listen to. And other teachers were posting sort of messages about resiliency and perseverance. And you see with some teachers, they'll check in with the kids pretty much daily online. My younger daughter's math teacher does lessons with a whiteboard and is available for office hours, virtual hours. But then there are other teachers. One of my son's teachers, she posts links to ministry material that was, available since after the March break. So there's kind of a wide variety. I know the Toronto Public Board passed a motion last week. They're hoping to start a dialogue with the teacher unions to get more live learning, more connections with students. And certainly you see in areas like, I believe it's Montreal, where the teachers were asked to check in with their kids weekly. Or live online, but they wanted their kids to have that connection with the teachers.
On that point, we would be remiss if we didn't think back to January, which in fairness really feels like years ago now. But back then, the education file was really one of the most fraught files for the province, right? I mean, you reported a lot on it. It was the first time in decades all the teachers' unions in Ontario went on strike.
All the people who think that we're out here because of pay, let me tell you, it's far more than that. Yes. We are here to defend an education system that we believe in.
Big demonstrations at Queen's Park. It was a really tense situation. Do you think anything has fundamentally changed about the relationship between teachers, unions, and the province in this case?
Well, you're right. I mean, things sort of started heating up in the fall, and we saw, a bit of work to rule. I mean, CUPE, which represents the support staff, they were the first ones to sort of get out there and start a work to rule, threaten a strike. And then I think they got a deal. They were the first ones to get a deal, and it was in October. And then after that, you sort of saw things heating up with the teacher union. So you saw bare bones report cards. Elementary teachers weren't doing extracurricular activities. There was a lot more sort of administrative work to rule. And then you started to see the rotating strikes, right? Which with the elementary teachers, the public elementary teachers, were twice a week, right? The Catholic teachers were out pretty much once a week. There was a lot of unrest in the schools. I think the relationship with the province is still pretty fraught. The pandemic hit, and then all the teacher unions ended up getting a deal. I mean, I think they realized times have changed. We all need to kind of pull together. We need stability, and we have to move forward. The education minister talking about the live, real-time synchronous learning. I mean, that's something that they're very, very upset about. That continues. Like teachers yesterday put out a news release saying that they needed to be part of any discussions about reopening schools and felt that they weren't being included at this point. So I think the relationship is still tense, even though there are contracts in place.
It's almost like teachers at this point are putting aside some of the labor disputes to focus, because right now there's a big job at hand for everybody, but they want to be part of those discussions going forward.
They do, for sure. And, the province has offered all kinds of professional development for teachers during this pandemic time. And I mean, they've had an uptick of, tens of thousands. So they are working, realizing that this is the situation and that everything does need to be online at the moment.
I mean, I have to imagine that this has to change some of the big picture education questions in this province, of the policy around it, around how to do it properly, especially heading into September.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you will have some teachers who are very tech savvy and others who are not. And I think that's probably what you're seeing now, right? Because, I mean, this happened so suddenly and teachers had to adapt. And some of them aren't particularly well versed in technology or using digital platforms. So I think that's just because of the hurriedness of it. And I know that there were complaints about that in universities as well, just because it was done so quickly. There wasn't really a lot of time for it to be fine-tuned. So now you have time to fine-tune it. The one thing I do find very interesting, though, about this whole, with schools being shut down and kids going to online learning, I think it has reinforced for students and for families the importance of in-class instruction, because that is the one thing you hear, is that the kids miss their friends. They miss being in class. They miss their teachers. I mean, I could talk about my own younger daughter. She and her friends had a FaceTime party or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
Talking about how they wished this one particular teacher could join them. They do miss their teachers and they do miss that connection. And I think the move to online learning during the pandemic has really reinforced that for families.
And for parents too, I'm sure in your case, and for many parents, there's more work at home now because you're doing multiple jobs at a time now.
My kids are teenagers, so my saving grace is that they sleep in. So I have, for example, right now it's quiet in my house, so I have time to do things. Certainly, once they're up, I mean, a bit of nagging is involved, right? And I have to kind of keep on top of what they're doing. For parents of younger kids, I think they've had a really tough time sort of juggling the work-life balance, right? Because we need a lot of supervision in front of the computer to get things done, probably even to get the computer started and get some things going. And then they've got to work as well. So I know that's been tough. And there's certainly a lot of teachers who are in that position as well. At my kids' old elementary school, one of the teachers posted a picture of her with her two little boys dressed in, I think, their Star Wars costumes, sitting on her lap while she was doing some video, filming some video for the kids. So it's a struggle, I think, for a lot of parents. And certainly you've seen a lot in the media about parents kind of feeling burnt out and a bit frustrated because it's been a long haul. It's a lot of learning for parents too.
As a political decision, when it comes to this cancellation, how do you feel that that's playing out at Queen's Park right now? How's the opposition reacting to that? What kind of reaction are we seeing there?
Well, I think after you saw just earlier than last week in France with the surge in cases after kids went back to school, I don't think anybody was thinking it would be a good idea to reopen the schools. I think the government did get support from, the opposition parties, certainly the NDP, the Liberals and the Greens all agreed with it and sort of were looking forward, saying, now let's look forward to the fall. How are we going to handle this? Premier Ford was very clear yesterday. He said several times, I'm not going to risk it. It's just not worth it. He's a father of 4 as well. I mean, they're all grown, but he's still, he's a father. And I think he said he would never risk children's safety. And that was just not something he was willing to do. He was asked, said, why not let schools reopen in areas where there's no COVID cases? I'm not going to risk it. And he was very clear on that. So I think there was pretty much universal support for this move.
The province, at least in the press conference, seemed to indicate that they have every intention of reopening in some form in September. I mean, we'll all see what our cases look like and what the epidemiological charts look like. But they said that they plan to unveil some sort of plan in June. Do we have any clues on what schools will look like based on what other provinces are doing or what other countries are doing? Anything that Minister Lecce had made reference to?
So he did mention yesterday things about, social distancing. He said we'd have to reimagine education in a sense. He talked a little bit about social distancing, cleaning, hygiene, that kind of things. If you look overseas, certainly class numbers are low. So they might have 10 or 12 kids in a class. They've all got to be 2 meters apart. They have regular hand washing. They go out for recess. They're allowed to play with one other child. So lots of things like that. And they're distanced at lunch. Ontario's Associate Medical Officer of Health has talked about some kind of screening when kids go back, whether that's temperature checks, I don't know. But certainly we see with the daycares that have opened, the emergency daycares, there's screening of staff and kids before they go in. There's no visitors allowed, deep cleaning, things like that. So I think those are the kind of things you're going to see when kids return in the fall. Out in BC, they're looking at part-time, kids going every other day. Older kids may be going in 1 day a week. They've come up with a lot of really interesting ideas. The task force that I mentioned down in the southern states, they've talked about things like allowing elementary teachers to keep the same group of students next year, just to give them a bit of continuity and support. And also maybe the teachers will be better able to identify gaps in learning since they've been kids this year. So schools are looking at all kinds of really interesting things to do. But yeah, they will look very different in the fall, if indeed the kids do go back in the fall. I mean, that I think is also a big question still.
This has to change the way schools operate, at least for now. But maybe this may change how it operates forever.
Well, I guess it would depend too on how long the virus is a threat. Universities have also, most of them are now saying that they're going to do online only this fall. There's a few in the States I saw last night that are saying online only for the entire year. So for universities, that's different as well. What about labs, hands-on learning, things like that? I mean, those are the kinds of things that are missed in an online environment.
Do we have any timetable on when that plan will be released in June? I know that teachers, parents, students all want to know a more clear plan than they've heard this week. I know this is a large-scale plan, but something a bit more concrete, do we know?
All he promised was by the end of the school year, so the end of June. There are discussions now being held with employee groups, principals, directors. They're all sort of brainstorming things that can be done for the fall. They're definitely looking to other jurisdictions to see how things go, and especially overseas because they've been doing it for some time, especially if you look at places like South Korea. They've been open for a while and other places. So I think they're going to have to learn from other jurisdictions, see what's going on and come up with plans. I know there was some talk about running pilot projects in places to see how it goes, sort of up in the air for the summer, depending on sort of local circumstances and if things do ease up or if there's another surge in the summer.
So really, like everything else in our world, wait and see. That's all we got.
Yeah, it's uncertainty. And I think that's going to be with us for a while. I think even if they do make plans for the fall, if there's another surge, those plans may have to be changed. I think they're going to have to be pretty flexible and pretty nimble on this.
Kris, thank you so much for your expertise on this.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Adrian.
And that's Kristin Rushowy, the Toronto Star's Queen's Park reporter on the unprecedented cancellation of Ontario schools. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Adrian Cheung, Saba Aitazaz, and Raju Muthar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattinen, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.